John Matthews wiped sweat from his brow as the hot California sun beat down on the Naval Special Warfare Training Center in Coronado. 1 week into SEAL training, and his body already felt like it might break apart. His muscles burned with each movement, reminders of the 4-mile runs, hundreds of push-ups, and endless swimming exercises that filled every day. "Move it, Matthews. You're falling behind," shouted Chief Petty Officer Alan Dawson from the edge of the obstacle course. John forced his tired legs to move faster as he approached the 30-foot cargo net. 21 other recruits scrambled across the course like ants, each fighting their own battle against exhaustion. Class 347 had started with 40 men. After just 1 week, nearly half had quit. As John reached for the cargo net, he noticed an old man quietly raking sand beneath the nearby rope swing. The man looked to be in his 70s, with weathered skin, silver hair cut in a military style, crew cut, and work clothes that had seen better days. While instructors shouted and recruits struggled, the old groundskeeper worked methodically, seemingly unaware of the chaos around him. "Matthews, eyes on your task." Chief Dawson's voice snapped. "John, back to the cargo net." "Yes, Chief." John called back, grabbing the ropes and beginning his climb. Throughout the afternoon, John found his attention repeatedly drawn to the old man. Unlike the other maintenance workers who joked among themselves, this man worked alone and in silence. More curiously, John noticed how the senior instructors treated him. They didn't ignore him like they did other groundskeepers. Instead, they nodded respectfully when passing by, sometimes even stopping for brief words. By late afternoon, John's energy reserves had completely drained. During the final obstacle, a series of mud pits separated by 6-foot walls, his foot slipped. He tumbled down hard, landing awkwardly near where the old man was collecting fallen branches. "You all right, son?" the old man asked, his voice surprisingly strong and clear. John tried to stand, wincing as pain shot through his ankle. "Yes, sir. I'm fine." The old man reached down with a surprisingly steady hand. John accepted the help, and as the man pulled him up, the sleeve of his work jacket rode up slightly. John caught a glimpse of blue-black ink on his forearm, a tattoo unlike any he'd seen before. It resembled a trident wrapped in strange writing, symbols that didn't look like any language. John recognized. "Thank you, sir," John said, staring at the spot where the tattoo had been visible before the sleeve fell back in place. The old man followed John's gaze and tugged his sleeve down further. "Better get back to your training, son. Chief Dawson doesn't appreciate stragglers." As if summoned by his name, Chief Dawson appeared beside them. "Matthews, what are you doing?" "Just took a fall, Chief," John replied, standing straighter despite the pain in his ankle. Chief Dawson looked between John and the old man, his expression unreadable. "Frank, is he bothering you?" The old man, Frank, shook his head. "Not at all, Alan. Boy just slipped." John noticed something odd in that brief exchange. Chief Dawson, who demanded to be addressed as Chief by everyone, including base officers, hadn't corrected Frank for using his first name. "Get back to your squad. Matthews," Chief Dawson ordered. "And remember, you're here to train, not to socialize with the staff." "Yes, Chief," John replied, limping back toward the obstacle course. Before rejoining his group, John glanced back. Chief Dawson and Frank stood in quiet conversation, both looking in his direction. Something in their posture suggested concern, rather than anger. That evening, after dinner, John sat on his bunk rubbing his sore ankle. The barracks buzzed with exhausted recruits preparing for the next day of torture that awaited them. "Going to make it, Matthews?" asked Rick Palmer from the next bunk over. Rick was built like a linebacker with broad shoulders and almost no neck. Despite his intimidating appearance, he'd been friendly since day one. "Yeah, just twisted my ankle. A bit. Nothing serious," John replied. "Better hope so. Week 2 is when they really start breaking us down," Rick said, lying back on his bunk with a groan. "My brother went through this 3 years ago. Said the first week is just the warm-up." John nodded, then asked, "Hey, do you know anything about the old groundskeeper? The one who works on the obstacle course?" Rick shrugged. "Which one?" "There's like a dozen maintenance guys. Older guy, silver crew cut. The instructors call him Frank." "Don't know, don't care," Rick said, pulling a worn photo of his girlfriend from under his pillow. "They're just base staff." "Why?" From 3 bunks down, another recruit spoke up. "You mean old man Weber?" Sam Winters was the youngest in their class at barely 20, with bright red hair and freckles that made him look even younger. John turned towards Sam. "Maybe. You know him?" Sam lowered his voice, causing John to lean in closer. "Not personally, but I've heard things. My uncle went through Buddhist training back in the 90s. Said Frank Weber isn't just some grounds worker." "What do you mean?" John asked. "Story goes, he was some kind of special operations guy back in the day. Not regular SEALs either, something else. Something classified." Sam glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers, though most recruits were too tired to pay attention. Rick snorted. "Every base has stories like that. Probably just an old retired sailor who took a maintenance job to keep busy." "I don't know," Sam insisted. "My uncle said the tattoo is the key." John's interest sharpened. "Tattoo? What about it?" Before Sam could answer, the lights flickered 3 times. The warning for lights out. "Tell you tomorrow," Sam whispered as Chief Dawson entered the barracks for final inspection. As John lay in his bunk that night, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't stop thinking about the old man and his strange tattoo. In the week since arriving at Coronado, John had learned that nothing at SEAL training happened by accident. Every challenge, every obstacle, every person had a purpose. Tomorrow would bring more pain, more challenges, more recruits quitting. John closed his eyes, determined not to be one of them. Whatever mysteries surrounded the quiet old man at the SEAL training facility, John Matthews intended to be around long enough to solve them. 2 weeks into SEAL training, John Matthews had entered what the instructors called Hell Week. The name fit perfectly. For 5 days straight, recruits would endure almost non-stop physical activity, with less than 4 hours of sleep total. Already, 10 more men had quit, leaving just 22 in Class 347. John's muscles trembled as he sat on the beach during one of their rare 15-minute breaks. His wet uniform clung to his body, chafing his skin raw in several places. Sand covered everything. His eyes burned from salt water and lack of sleep. Nearby, other recruits either collapsed in exhaustion or frantically ate energy bars to fuel their depleted bodies. John scanned the beach until he spotted Sam Winters sitting alone, staring out at the ocean. John pushed himself to his feet and walked over, dropping down beside Sam. "You said you'd tell me about Weber's tattoo," John reminded him, keeping his voice low. Sam glanced around before answering. "My uncle said it's not a regular Navy tattoo, not anchor and eagles or unit insignia. It's something else." "I saw it briefly. Looked like a trident with strange writing," John said. Sam nodded. "That's the one. Uncle Joe said back in the 80s, there was a special unit formed. Not regular SEALs, though they recruited from Buddhist graduates. Something about underwater operations. But not the kind you'd think." John frowned. What other kind of underwater operations could there be? Before Sam could answer, an instructor blew a whistle, signaling their break was over. "Later," Sam whispered, standing up. The afternoon brought boat drills. 6-man teams carried heavy inflatable boats on their heads, running up and down the beach for hours. By evening, John could barely stand. The instructors drove them into the cold Pacific Ocean for a night swimming exercise. Fog had rolled in, thick and disorienting. The instructors paired them up, each team following a compass bearing out to a buoy and back. John was paired with a recruit named Greg Willis, a former college swimmer who seemed to handle the water better than most. Halfway to their assigned buoy, the fog grew so dense that John could barely see Greg swimming beside him. The muffled sounds of other recruits calling to each other faded away. Then, without warning, a strong current caught them, pulling them sideways. "We're drifting," Greg shouted over the sound of waves. "Need to correct course." They tried to adjust, swimming harder against the current, but the effort drained their already exhausted bodies. After 15 minutes of fighting the water, Greg suggested they swim to shore and reorient. They turned toward where the beach should be, but in the thick fog, all directions looked the same. The current continued pulling them along the coast. After swimming for what felt like hours, John's limbs grew heavier. Greg began to lag behind. Need to rest, Greg gasped. Instructor said no stopping, John reminded him, though he too desperately wanted to stop. Just for a minute, Greg insisted. They treaded water, breathing hard. A wave separated them. John called out but got no answer. He shouted Greg's name several times, spinning in the water, trying to peer through the fog. Nothing. Panic gripped him as he realized he was alone in the ocean at night. John forced himself to calm down and think. Shore had to be in one direction. He picked what seemed right and swam. Eventually, his feet touched sand. He dragged himself onto the beach, collapsing on his hands and knees. This wasn't the training area. Rocky cliffs rose behind the narrow strip of beach. John had no idea how far he'd drifted. He needed to find his way back before instructors marked him as quitting. A small light flickered further down the beach. John stumbled toward it, hoping to find help. As he got closer, he recognized the silhouette of the old groundskeeper, Frank Weber, sitting on a rock. The man held something in his hands that emitted a soft blue glow. Frank was looking up at the night sky, where gaps in the fog revealed stars. The strange device in his hands projected what looked like star patterns, but they moved and shifted in ways John didn't understand. John stepped on a piece of driftwood that cracked loudly. Frank's head snapped toward the sound. He quickly pocketed the device, but not before John got a clear look at it. It wasn't like any technology John had ever seen. "Lost your way, Matthews?" Frank asked calmly, as if finding a SEAL trainee washed up on a remote beach was perfectly normal. "Yes, sir," John admitted, too tired to question how Frank knew his name. "Got separated from my swim partner in the fog." Frank stood up, his movements fluid and strong for a man his age. "Beautiful night for stargazing," he said casually, gesturing toward the sky where the fog had parted. "The Proxima Centauri system is particularly clear tonight." John frowned, confused by the specific astronomical reference. He looked up but saw only normal stars. "You should rejoin your team, son," Frank continued. "Navigation isn't just about knowing where you are on Earth." Before John could question this strange statement, footsteps sounded from further down the beach. Chief Dawson emerged from the fog, carrying a waterproof flashlight. "Found another one, Frank?" Chief Dawson asked, showing no surprise at finding the groundskeeper there. "Current's strong tonight," Frank replied with a meaningful look. "Pulled several of your boys off course." Chief Dawson nodded, then turned to John. "Willis made it back already? Said you got separated." "Yes, Chief," John answered, relieved that Greg was safe. "Let's go, Matthews. Night's not over," Chief Dawson said, gesturing back the way he'd come. As they walked along the beach, Chief Dawson checked his watch, adjusting the band. The sleeve of his uniform pulled back slightly, and John caught a glimpse of a familiar, blue-black mark on his wrist, the same symbol he'd seen on Frank's arm. A trident wrapped in strange writing. John looked up quickly, but Chief Dawson had already fixed his sleeve. The chief gave no indication he'd noticed John's glance, but his expression seemed more thoughtful than usual. "Chief," John ventured, "how did you know where to find me?" "Frank called it in," Dawson answered simply. "He spots drifters pretty often during night swims." "With all respect, Chief, how did he spot me in this fog?" Chief Dawson stopped walking and turned to face John. "Some questions aren't meant for trainees, Matthews. Focus on surviving Hell Week first, understood?" "Yes, Chief," John replied automatically. As they rejoined the other recruits continuing their night exercises, John couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen. The strange device, Frank's knowledge of distant star systems, the matching tattoos, and most puzzling of all, Chief Dawson's lack of surprise at finding Frank alone on a remote beach in the middle of the night, during a fog so thick it had disoriented trained Navy men. Whatever was happening at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center went far beyond ordinary SEAL training, and somehow John knew the quiet old groundskeeper stood at the center of it all. John Matthews stood tall alongside the 19 other recruits who had survived Hell Week. His body ached in places he never knew could hurt, but pride overshadowed the pain. Chief Dawson walked along their line, examining each man with critical eyes. "Congratulations on not quitting," Chief Dawson said, his voice lacking any warmth. "But don't get comfortable. Finishing Hell Week just means you've earned the right to continue training. The real work starts now." Over the next 3 days, the remaining recruits began weapons training. John excelled at marksmanship, hitting targets with consistent accuracy that impressed even the stern instructors. On the 4th day, as they practiced with rifles on the firing range, John noticed Frank Weber watching from a nearby maintenance shed. Unlike his usual groundskeeping tasks, Frank simply stood observing, eyes narrowed as he studied their techniques. When one recruit struggled with his rifle, Frank shook his head slightly as if noting a specific error. Chief Dawson approached Frank and they spoke briefly before Frank walked away. Later that afternoon, John received a rare 2-hour break. Most recruits used such time to sleep, but curiosity drove John to the base library. He found a computer terminal in a quiet corner and searched for information about Frank Weber. The first results showed nothing unusual, just a few mentions of a Franklin Weber in Navy personnel records from decades ago. John was about to give up when he noticed a folder labeled Local Archives on the computer desktop. He clicked it and found digitized newspaper clippings from the San Diego area dating back to the 1970s. On impulse, John searched for Weber within these archives. A headline from 1989 caught his attention. USS Nevada crew receives commendations after classified incident. The small article mentioned unusual atmospheric conditions recorded off the California coast and an unprecedented Navy response. Among the officers pictured receiving awards stood a much younger Frank Weber, then a lieutenant, his face serious as an admiral pinned a medal on his uniform. The article mentioned anomalous contact scenarios and exemplary first response protocols. Without explaining what these meant, John scrolled down, finding a brief mention that Lieutenant Weber would lead a newly formed special unit following the incident, but all details were classified. John clicked on a link for related articles, but a message appeared. Access restricted. Military clearance required. Finding anything interesting, Matthews? John jumped at the voice. Commander Laura Nichols, the base executive officer, stood behind him. A tall woman with short gray hair and sharp eyes she rarely interacted with. Trainees directly. Just some local history, Commander, John replied, quickly closing the archive window. History can teach us important lessons, she said, her tone neutral. Especially naval history. But don't let curiosity distract you from training. Chief, Dawson tells me you're showing promise. Thank you, ma'am, John said, standing respectfully. Commander Nichols studied him for a moment. Carry on, Matthews, she finally said before walking away. That night, John couldn't sleep. The article, Frank's strange device, the matching tattoos, none of it made sense. Around midnight, he gave up trying to rest and walked to the common area to get water. To his surprise, Frank Weber sat alone at a table, reading a book with strange symbols on its cover. When Frank saw John, he didn't seem startled. Instead, he closed the book and gestured to the chair across from him. Trouble sleeping, son? John hesitated, then sat down. Yes, sir. Call me Frank. I'm not in your chain of command. Aren't you? John asked before he could stop himself. Frank's eyebrows rose slightly. You've been asking questions, he stated. That's good. SEALs need curiosity, but some questions lead to answers you might not be ready for. John took a deep breath. I saw the article about the USS Nevada incident. You were a lieutenant then. Frank's weathered face revealed nothing. A long time ago, the article mentioned anomalous conditions and contact scenarios. What does that mean? Frank leaned back in his chair. What do you think it means, John? I don't know, John admitted. But it's connected to that tattoo, isn't it? The one you and Chief Dawson both have. Frank glanced at his covered forearm. Sometimes humanity faces threats beyond our shores, beyond our skies. The Navy has always been about exploring unknown waters. Some waters just happen to be farther away than others. Before John could ask what that meant, an alarm blared throughout the building. Red emergency lights began flashing in the hallways. Frank stood immediately, all casualness gone from his posture. Commander Nichols's voice came over the intercom. "Attention all personnel, this is not a drill. We are under meteor shower warning protocols. All personnel move indoors to designated shelter areas immediately. Repeat, this is not a drill." Recruits stumbled from their beds, confused but responding to the authority in the commander's voice. Chief Dawson appeared, directing everyone toward the building's central hallway. "What's happening?" Sam asked, looking frightened. "Just follow orders," Chief Dawson barked. John moved with the others but glanced out a window first. What he saw made him freeze. Lights streaked across the night sky, but they weren't falling like meteors. They moved in patterns, some stopping suddenly, others changing direction at impossible angles. One bright light hovered over the ocean, pulsing with colors that shifted from blue to green. A hand gripped John's shoulder firmly. Frank stood beside him, watching the lights with a grim expression. "Those aren't meteors," John whispered. "No," Frank agreed quietly. "They're not." "Then what?" "Matthews, Weber, get away from the windows now," Commander Nichols shouted from down the hall. Frank guided John toward the others. As they walked, Frank spoke in a low voice only John could hear. "The Nevada incident wasn't the first contact, just the first official one. They've been watching us for decades. Usually they keep their distance, observe only. This is different. They're looking for something, or someone." The group of recruits huddled in the windowless hallway. Most looked confused or scared. But John noticed that Sam, Chief Dawson, and two other instructors seemed tense in a different way, alert and ready, like soldiers expecting combat. A deep vibration shook the building. Dust fell from the ceiling as lights flickered. The vibration grew stronger, and with it came a high-pitched sound at the edge of hearing that made John's teeth ache. "They're scanning," Frank muttered, so quietly John barely heard him. After 5 minutes that felt like hours, the vibration stopped. The strange lights outside faded. 10 minutes later, Commander Nichols announced that the meteor shower had passed and everyone should return to their quarters. As recruits shuffled back to their beds, John noticed Frank slipping out a side door. Chief Dawson and Commander Nichols followed him. Through the briefly opened door, John saw multiple vehicles with government plates arriving, men in dark suits rushing toward the beach. Back in the barracks, no one spoke about what had happened. Most recruits seemed eager to accept the meteor shower explanation and return to sleep. But John noticed Sam sitting awake on his bunk, eyes wide and alert. "Those weren't meteors," John whispered as he passed by. Sam met his eyes and nodded once. "My uncle said they always come back, especially after storms." "What does that mean?" Sam lay down and turned his back to John. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow. Won't be easy." John returned to his bunk, mind racing. One thing was now certain. The quiet old man at the SEAL training facility was far more than a groundskeeper, and whatever secret Frank Weber protected had something to do with those lights in the sky. The morning after the strange lights, training resumed as if nothing unusual had happened. John looked for Frank but didn't see him anywhere on base. The beach where the lights had appeared was blocked off with temporary fencing. Men and women, in civilian clothes, examined the sand with strange equipment, collecting samples and taking readings. During underwater demolition practice, John partnered with Rick Palmer. They took turns placing dummy explosives on targets submerged in the training pool, while the other provided security. "Did you see those weird lights last night?" John asked as they treaded water between exercises. Rick's face hardened. "Just meteors. Commander Nichols explained it all this morning." "Those weren't meteors," John insisted. "Meteors don't stop and change direction." Rick glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered his voice. "Drop it, Matthews. Some questions aren't worth asking." Before John could respond, the instructor called them to continue the exercise. As Rick turned in the water to swim toward the next target, John noticed something on his shoulder blade through the wet t-shirt. A familiar blue-black mark that looked exactly like the tattoo Frank and Chief Dawson had. John said nothing during the rest of training, but his mind raced. The tattoo meant Rick was involved somehow, How many others knew whatever secret Frank protected? That evening, John cornered Rick in a supply closet after dinner. "You have the tattoo," John said without preamble. "The same one Frank and Chief Dawson have?" Rick's friendly demeanor vanished. He checked to make sure they were alone, then spoke in a serious tone John had never heard from him before. "You need to stop asking questions, Matthews. It's dangerous." "For who?" John challenged. "For everyone." Rick sighed, then seemed to make a decision. "My father served with Frank in the 80s. He had the same tattoo. Called themselves Trident Deep. Not a regular SEAL team." "What was their mission?" Rick hesitated. "Dad never told me everything. Just bits and pieces when he'd had too much to drink. The tattoo marks those who've encountered them and lived." "Encountered who?" John pressed. "Not who. What?" Rick's voice dropped even lower. "They're not from here, Matthews. Not from Earth. The tattoo is more than just a mark. It's some kind of interface. Dad said it let him understand their language, operate their technology." John thought of the strange device Frank had been using on the beach. "So Frank was part of First Contact?" "One of the first, maybe the most important. He didn't just encounter them, he lived among them for years." A noise in the hallway made both men freeze. When no one entered, Rick continued. "There are others stationed worldwide at strategic locations, watching, preparing. My dad was one until he died 5 years ago." "Preparing for what?" John asked. "War, maybe. Or something worse." Rick glanced at his watch. "I've said too much. Just know that the lights last night, they're a bad sign. They never come this close unless something's wrong." Rick left quickly, leaving John alone with more questions than answers. As he walked back to the barracks, Chief Dawson intercepted him. "Commander Nichols wants to see you. Now." John followed Chief Dawson to the administration building. In Commander Nichols's office, Frank Weber waited alongside a woman John didn't recognize. She wore a dark suit and had the rigid posture of military despite her civilian clothes. "Matthews," Commander Nichols said. "This is Dr. Karen Lewis from Naval Intelligence." "Doctor," Lewis studied John with piercing eyes. "You've been asking questions about the Nevada incident and Lieutenant Weber's role in it." It wasn't a question, so John remained silent. Frank stepped forward. "We have 2 options here. We can process you out of the program with a general discharge for security violations, or we can show you the truth. Your choice." "What truth?" John asked. Instead of answering, Frank nodded to Dr. Lewis, who placed a small device on the commander's desk. It projected a 3-dimensional image in the air, a recording dated May 12, 1989. The image showed a younger Frank Weber in a wetsuit, standing on the deck of a ship. Behind him, something massive and clearly not human-made rose from the ocean. Its surface shifted colors like oil on water. A section of the object opened, revealing a chamber within. "This was first official contact," Frank explained as John stared at the projection. "A scout vessel for a species we now call the Vardal. They'd been observing Earth for decades but never revealed themselves until their ship was damaged in an underwater earthquake." The recording showed young Frank approaching the opening while other Navy personnel stood back, weapons raised. "I volunteered to make contact," Frank continued. "We had no translators, no protocols. I just went in and hoped for the best." "Why you?" John asked. "I'd had an encounter before as a kid. They remembered me." Frank tapped his forearm where the tattoo was. "This was their gift after I helped repair their vessel. It allows neural connection to their technology, lets humans understand their language." The projection changed to show other encounters, other ships. Some looked similar to the first, others were entirely different. "We weren't alone even then," Commander Nichols said. "Multiple species have been visiting Earth for centuries. Most are peaceful observers. Some are not." Chief Dawson stepped forward. "After the Nevada incident, Navy brass created Trident Deep, a special unit to handle extraterrestrial encounters, mainly underwater since that's where they often hide their vessels. What you saw last night wasn't a meteor shower," Dr. Lewis said. It was a search party. They're looking for something or someone. Frank turned off the projection. We've been monitoring increased activity for months. Something's changed out there. The peaceful observers are leaving. Others are arriving. Why tell me this? John asked, struggling to process everything he was seeing. Commander Nichols leaned forward. Because we've been watching you, Matthews. You've shown the right combination of skills, adaptability, and intuition. Qualities we need. What are you saying? SEAL Team 347 isn't a regular training class, Chief Dawson explained. It's a selection program for candidates who might have the potential to join Trident Deep. Out of your original 40, we identified 6 with the right profiles. You're one of them, Frank said simply. Now you have a choice. Continue this path knowing what you know, or walk away with an honorable discharge and a strong recommendation for any regular SEAL team. John looked at the blank space where the projection had been, trying to make sense of this new reality. If I continue, what happens? Specialized training, Commander Nichols answered. Beyond what regular SEALs receive. Then deployment to monitoring stations around the world, or beyond. Beyond? John repeated. Frank nodded. We have personnel on the International Space Station, lunar outposts, even a small base on Mars. The front line isn't just on Earth anymore. John thought of his father, who had served as a regular Navy sailor his whole career, of his brother who wanted to follow the same path, of the normal life he might never have, if he accepted. I need time to think, John said finally. You have, until tomorrow morning, Commander Nichols replied. For now you're confined to quarters. This conversation never happened. As John left the office, his mind spinning with impossible revelations, Chief Dawson walked alongside him. For what it's worth, the chief said quietly. Frank recommended you personally. Said you reminded him of himself at your age. That's high. Praise from a man who's seen more worlds than anyone alive on Earth. Looking up at the night sky as they walked, John wondered how many of those distant stars had already been visited by humans like Frank Weber, the quiet old man whose simple appearance had hidden the most extraordinary story John could imagine. John Matthews spent the night staring at the ceiling of his quarters. By morning, his decision was made. When Chief Dawson came to escort him back to Commander Nichols's office, John stood ready in his uniform. I'm in, John said simply as he entered the office where Frank, Commander Nichols, and Dr. Lewis waited. Frank nodded, a hint of a smile on his weathered face. I thought you might be. What happens now? John asked. Now the real training begins, Commander Nichols said. She handed John a folder with a new schedule. You and the other 5 candidates will continue basic SEAL training with your class, but you'll also receive specialized instruction. Chief Dawson pointed to the schedule. Extra sessions at 0500 and 2100 hours daily. No one outside the program can know about them. Over the next month, John discovered what those extra sessions involved. Before dawn each morning, he and 5 other recruits, including Rick Palmer and Sam Winters, met in a section of the base he hadn't known existed. Behind a heavy door requiring both retinal and palm scans lay an underground facility that extended deep beneath the training center. The technology there was like nothing John had ever seen. Screens displayed star maps with hundreds of marked locations. Equipment hummed with strange energy. In one room, a piece of metal floating in a containment field changed shape when Frank approached it. Their training was equally strange. They learned about a dozen different non-terrestrial species, their biology, technology, and intentions toward Earth. They practiced using devices salvaged from crashed ships. They studied new physics that contradicted everything John had learned in school. Frank Weber led much of this training personally. His quiet demeanor remained, but his expertise was undeniable. He moved through the alien technology with casual familiarity, explaining concepts that seemed impossible with simple clarity. The universe is more crowded than humans ever imagined, Frank told them during one session. Most species out there are simply curious about Earth. Some are helpful, a few are hostile. Why do they hide from us? Sam asked. Policy of non-interference, Frank explained. Most advanced species follow strict rules about contact with developing worlds. Earth is considered young, still figuring out its own problems. Then why are you telling us? John asked. Why create Trident Deep at all? Frank's expression darkened. Because not everyone follows the rules. Some see Earth as a resource to exploit. Others view humans as a potential threat to eliminate before we develop further. We're the quiet guardians against those threats. On the final day of their specialized training, Frank took John aside. There's something I want to show you, he said, leading John to a secure elevator that descended deeper than they had gone before. When the doors opened, John gasped. They stood in an enormous underground hangar. In the center rested a craft unlike anything on Earth, sleek and silver, with no visible seams or propulsion systems. The Vartal gave us this after the Nevada incident, Frank explained. It's how we monitor activity in our solar system. John walked around the craft in awe. You've been to space in this? And beyond. Frank placed his hand on the smooth hull. A section opened in response to his touch. The tattoo is the key. It connects pilot to ship. Inside, the craft was surprisingly simple. Curved seats surrounded by what looked like clear glass, though John suspected it was something far more advanced. Tomorrow, you and the other candidates will receive your tattoos, Frank said. The process is uncomfortable, but necessary if you're going to join us fully. Will we fly in this? John asked, unable to hide his excitement. Eventually. First deployment is usually lunar outpost duty. We maintain a small base on the far side of the moon, away from prying eyes. As they returned to the surface, John finally asked the question that had been bothering him since the night of the lights. The search party you mentioned, what were they looking for? Frank hesitated before answering. A fugitive. Someone very dangerous who escaped custody during transport. The Vartal believe he's hiding on Earth, possibly in this region. Is that why you're here, at the training facility? Partly. I also evaluate potential recruits. But yes, this area has seen unusual activity recently, the kind that suggests someone is using advanced technology to hide. The next morning, John and the other 5 candidates gathered in a sterile room deep in the underground facility. Dr. Lewis stood next to a device that hummed with blue energy. The process takes approximately 10 minutes, she explained. The nanites will integrate with your nervous system, creating a neural interface that allows communication with non-terrestrial technology. One by one, the candidates received their tattoos. When John's turn came, he rolled up his sleeve and placed his arm in the device. The pain was intense, like thousands of tiny needles moving beneath his skin. When it finished, the familiar trident symbol wrapped in alien script marked his forearm, the ink seeming to shift slightly when he moved. Welcome to Trident Deep, Frank said formally, as the 6 newly marked recruits stood at attention. What you do from this day forward will never be known to the public. Your missions will never be celebrated. Your sacrifices will never be mourned openly. But know this, you are the first line of defense for humanity in a universe far more complex and dangerous than most will ever know. Commander Nichols stepped forward. Your first deployment begins tomorrow, lunar outpost duty. 6 months. Consider it your probationary period. After the briefing, John found Frank alone in the hangar, preparing the craft for launch. Having second thoughts? Frank asked, noticing John's pensive expression. No, sir, just trying to process everything. A week ago, I thought you were just a quiet old man at the SEAL training facility. Frank laughed softly. That's the point, son. The best defenders are the ones nobody notices, fighting battles most will never know occurred. John touched his new tattoo, feeling a strange warmth and connection to the ship nearby. If I hadn't noticed your tattoo that day, you'd be completing regular SEAL training, headed for a conventional deployment. Frank placed a hand on John's shoulder. But some people are meant for a different path. I recognize that in you from the start. As the silver craft rose silently through the opening hangar doors the next morning, John Matthews looked down at the SEAL training facility growing smaller below. New recruits ran the obstacle course where he had first spotted Frank Weber working. None of them looked up to see the impossible ship carrying John and his teammates toward the stars. They didn't notice, just as John once hadn't noticed the truth about the quiet old man with the strange tattoo, that some of humanity's greatest heroes worked in complete silence, defending Earth from threats beyond imagination, asking for no recognition except from those few who shared the mark of Trident Deep.